Okay, let's get into it. Today we are doing a deep dive into a really highly charged and complex issue.
Hmm.
The political operations of the American Sikh Congressional Caucus, or the ASCC.
Right. And this is an organization that was, founded to give the Sikh American community a powerful voice on Capitol Hill.
But instead, it's become the center of this intense internal controversy. There are accusations of a fundamental betrayal.
That's right. And our mission for you, the learner, is to really move past the emotion and just grasp the core arguments surrounding the ASCC's actions.
And the source material for all of this is, well, it's explosive. The whole controversy really centers on this one highly critical book,
It's titled Hridaya Kapta Mukha Jnani.
which translates to something like Heart of Deceit, Face of Wisdom. I mean, that title alone tells you everything about the tone here.
It absolutely does, and it sets up the central allegation that the ASCC and its leadership, specifically naming S. Partap Singh and his associates, have allegedly engaged in anti-Sikh activities.
And betrayed community goals. Some critics even suggest that these actions seem to align with the interests of the Indian government.
So, to really understand the accusations, we first have to establish what this organization is even supposed to be. What is a congressional caucus?
Right, the basics.
Well, it's essentially a pressure group. It's formed when community advocates persuade members of the U.S. Congress to agree on, legislative objectives related to their cause.
And the ASCC was formally set up in 2013 by American congressmen, the goal being to champion Sikh American interests.
But here's where it gets interesting right from the very beginning. The moment it was formed, it created these shock waves.
We're talking 2013, and the Times of India reported at the time that the launch brought people known as Khalistan supporters back into Capitol Hill.
Exactly. And they noted that a lot of the individuals who were there at the ceremony were on India's blacklist.
And just for clarity, that's a list the Indian government has historically kept to, bar people from traveling to India.
Right. Or at least subject them to a lot of scrutiny, usually because of their political activism supporting an independent Sikh state or Khalistan.
So that initial perception of hosting these politically charged activists, it immediately made the caucus a lightning rod for controversy.
Not just in the community, but you have to imagine also in diplomatic circles in Washington, D.C.
And that initial challenge, it really just set the stage for the legislative failures that critics then seized on as, proof of ineffectiveness.
Yeah, the sources are meticulous here. They detail multiple House resolutions that were introduced between 2013 and 2019. Things like HRes 157, 550, 192, a whole list of them.
And these were aimed at getting recognition for community holidays, like Vaisakhi, or condemning the 2012 Oak Creek massacre, things that seem, on the surface, pretty straightforward.
You'd think so, but if you look at the legislative process, we know resolutions are tough. You need co-sponsors, you need committee approval, and then you need a majority House vote.
And what the critics found so concerning was that even though these resolutions had co-sponsors,
Right, sometimes just 5, but sometimes as many as 36 members of Congress.
even with that support, so many of them just failed. They failed right at the committee level.
So what does that actually mean, to fail at the committee level?
It's the legislative graveyard.
Right.
It means that powerful committee chairs or members, maybe they were concerned about U.S.-India relations or facing some kind of diplomatic pressure, were actively blocking even symbolic recognition.
So these resolutions became political landmines.
Exactly. And the critics argue the caucus leadership just couldn't muster the political capital to get them past those gatekeepers.
And so the failure to secure even these symbolic wins, like just getting Vaisakhi recognized, became a primary data point for arguing the caucus was either ineffective or, worse, compromised.
Okay, so we've seen the legislative side. But maybe the most potent allegations against the caucus, they involve money and specific political relationship.
This is where the controversy becomes highly specific. A key accusation centers on Congressman Ami Bera.
He was the sole Indian-American congressman at the time and a member of the Sikh caucus.
Right. He and another caucus member, Mike Honda, were singled out because critics claim they refused to answer questions about recognizing the 1984 Sikh massacre and killings.
And that silence on the 1984 issue is politically deafening for the community. So the strategy here appears to be, prioritize small, visible, domestic wins over these huge human rights battles.
It seems that way because the sources document these contradictory actions by Bera that suggest some serious political maneuvering.
Like what?
Precisely this. When Ami Bera was facing political challenges in his district, he very publicly advocated for the right of Sikh basketball players to wear turbans.
Okay, a very visible domestic issue.
Very visible. And who was helping him with this high-profile advocacy? Key Sikh caucus committee members, including Harpreet Sandhu. It's a classic example of a political trade-off.
And that move was complicated even more in September 2014. The Sacramento Sikh Society hosted an international Kabaddi Cup. Bera was a special guest.
He spoke, he posed for photos, which his campaign later used to suggest he had local Sikh support.
But this happened even though a local Sikh political action committee had formally withdrawn its support for him.
And they did that for the exact reason we just mentioned, criticizing Bera for shying away from the 1984 massacre issue, which other leaders had actually signed letters about.
The implication there is powerful. A minor, high-visibility domestic issue, the turban, was allegedly being used by Bera to get support.
Enabled by caucus members, the critics would say.
While the major human rights issue, 1984, just remained untouched.
And that brings us right to the money. The financial backing allegations. They are substantial.
This financial trail leads critics to make a very serious accusation that these large, targeted contributions show the caucus leadership was prioritizing pro-Indian government politicians over Sikh interests.
The sources are specific. They detail these eyebrow-raising contributions made by S. Pratap Singh and his family. For instance, in 2017, $31,600 was contributed to Ed Royce.
And why is that name significant?
Well, Royce was a major player in the U.S.-India relationship, and he was known for working actively to lift Narendra Modi's visa ban.
Okay, and the money didn't stop there.
No. Another $27,000 was contributed in 2016 to Kamala Harris, who, years before, in 2005, had opposed a Sikh youth wearing a turban and beard in a job application.
So critics look at these politicians, people they'd say have Sikh enmity or are too close to the Indian government, and they claim the caucus is actively funding the opposition.
Effectively buying access with the wrong people. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the criticism becomes structural. It alleges a fundamental double standard in the caucus's geopolitical priorities.
Right. Like they're operating under this selective lens, ignoring huge historical and political Sikh issues to avoid, diplomatic friction?
That's the accusation.
If the point of this caucus is to give the community a voice, how do you square that with the fact that some of the most emotional historical issues are completely absent from their agenda?
It's a fair question. And the list of issues the sources accuse the caucus of never raising in Congress is, well, it's telling.
What's on it?
The Khalistan Declaration, the long-standing issue of water and electricity sharing for Punjab. And, crucially, any dedicated action on the 1984 attack on Darbar Sahib, which the sources call the Sikh genocide.
This raises that essential question of priorities. Why go to all the trouble of setting up a congressional caucus if the most sensitive issues are just off-limits from the start?
The sources offer a really compelling contrast by looking at what other caucuses have managed to do.
This is the aha moment, isn't it?
I think so. You look at the Armenian caucus, they successfully introduced a resolution condemning Azerbaijan's military operation in Nagorno-Karabakh.
And the Ethiopian American caucus. That one is co-chaired by John Garamendi, who is also an ASCC co-chair. And that caucus explicitly works to expand democracy and human rights in Ethiopia.
The criticism against Garamendi is pretty direct here. He's willing to address human rights abuses in Ethiopia, but allegedly denies addressing similar Sikh rights abuses in India.
So that fuels the narrative that the caucus, or at least its leaders, are selectively choosing which human rights issues are safe to talk about.
We saw this tension play out so vividly during the Indian farmers' protests of 2020 and 2021.
Right, congressional members did respond, which you could call a win for the caucus. Garamendi, Jim Costa, Sheila Jackson-Lee, they all wrote to the Indian ambassador in December 2020.
They expressed concern over police suppression, tear gas, water cannons against peaceful protesters.
But the devil is always in the details, isn't it?
Always. A Senate letter, co-signed by powerful people like Robert Menendez and Chuck Schumer in March 2021, well, it did urge raising freedom of speech concerns, but it also explicitly condemned the unacceptable violence at the Red Fort by a small faction of protesters.
And critics suggest that specific detail was unnecessary and that it inadvertently supported the Indian government's narrative of protester criminality.
Once again, compromising a human rights stance to maintain, it seems, a political balance.
Okay, now we have to shift gears completely, because the caucus leadership's defense against these heavy accusations is vigorous. It's detailed, it's personal, and we have to give full weight to their counter-narrative.
Absolutely. Key figures in the defense, S. Pratap Singh and Dr. Gurdarshan Singh Dhillon, they immediately dismiss that critical book.
Hriday Kapta Mukherjiani.
They call it propaganda, a pamphlet, fiction. They claim it was written by a man named Peter Frederick, who they say is a paid associate of one of their chief critics.
So they're suggesting the entire thing is a targeted character assassination.
And, they claim, fueled by Indian intelligence trying to disrupt the caucus.
That is a serious counteraccusation. But S. Pratap Singh also addresses the money and that alleged link to Sumit Saini.
He clarifies that the link to Saini is just a distant kinship. But more compellingly, he uses his own history as a shield.
How so?
This is a pivotal moment in his defense. He insists he was actually arrested and interrogated by Saini and other high-ranking officers back in 1987. He spent 15 months in jail.
So he's presenting his own imprisonment as irrefutable proof that he was not protected, he was not aligned with anti-Sikh elements.
Exactly. He's saying, I have my own history of persecution, which directly contradicts the narrative that he serves pro-Indian interests.
He also defends the large sums of money spent.
He's very clear on this. The annual budget for the caucus committee is substantial, over $250,000, and he says most of it is funded by his own family.
And he justifies this as just necessary for legal political contributions and operational costs. He even mentions things like flying Congress members first class to keep them involved.
I mean, the core of their argument is that this is the price of doing business in Washington. They emphasize a strong counter-narrative, highlighting the achievements they have secured.
And they stress that they are an advocacy group operating under U.S. law. They're not a state. They're not a country.
They point to organizing congressional briefings and hearings on the Sikh genocide and minority rights in India in 2015, 2016, and 2017.
Events that involved high-level figures, like a UN undersecretary.
Right. They argue that organizing these high-profile hearings is a critical way to keep the issues alive when passing a resolution just isn't politically possible.
And they have what is probably their most prominent domestic achievement, which directly impacts American Sikhs.
The work they did to help Sikhs serve in the U.S. Army with their religious articles, the turban and the beard.
They also point to tangible financial support, detailing 23 Little Lakh for mobile toilets and rations sent to the farmer protests at the Delhi borders.
And Dr. Gurdarshan Singh Dhillon provides the final, crucial context for their limitations. He stresses the caucus is just a platform, not an authority. It has to operate within the bounds of the U.S. Constitution and geopolitical realities.
He states very unequivocally that Congress members will always prioritize U.S. national interests and the U.S.-India strategic relationship first, no matter what.
And they argue that that context, not betrayal, is what explains all the compromises.
So what does this all mean for you, for the learner?
The core conflict that these sources lay bare is whether the American Sikh Congressional Caucus is a pragmatic political instrument,
making necessary compromises to navigate these complex U.S. geopolitical constraints to get some domestic wins.
or if, as the critics allege, its actions and its funding decisions show a fundamental betrayal of the core Sikh human rights and ideological objectives it was formed to protect.
The sources reveal a deep, painful tension. Building political power abroad often forces this choice between ideological purity
Which might just lead to legislative silence.
and strategic political effectiveness, which requires these painful compromises. We've seen evidence of both success and failure, and money flowing to some very controversial people.
And so, given the massive financial investment and organizational effort it takes to build a platform like the ASCC, the challenge for the diaspora community is still defining the standards to hold its leaders to.
Is it absolute adherence to ideological goals? Or is it pragmatic success within the limitations of a foreign government system?
This raises one final provocative thought for you to explore.
What this really boils down to is whether the millions of dollars and decades of effort invested in building this political voice were a necessary compromise that yields limited but real wins.
Or if it was just a really expensive way to silence the community's most painful historical and human rights issues.
Does a transnational community risk more by embracing politically compromised leaders who at least get a seat at the table, or by abandoning the political system altogether and ensuring they have no voice at all?
Something to mull over as you process what we've unpacked today.